Now, in this special emergency edition, we have as our guest Ian R. Crane. Ian, welcome.
Thank you, Alex.
Only just hot off the plane from down under, a speaking tour of Australia and New Zealand. So it would only be civil for me to say, was it an interesting reaction you got down there?
A very interesting reaction. There are indeed some very enlightened people in Australia. Unfortunately, I regret to say that the vast majority are sleepwalking into not only a massive financial crash, which I believe will hit Australia in about 12 months' time, but also the great tragedy, which is the stripping of the nation of its natural resources. And unfortunately, the people aren't benefiting from that.
Almost sort of a big production number version of what we've seen in Ireland, basically.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Well, we'll certainly cover this in more detail throughout the programme, but obviously from what I said right at the start of the programme, we're dealing with very tense times in Iran. So we've cleared the schedules so that we could get this to the top of the agenda. Tell me, why do you think now is the time where it is all going to kick off?
Well, I think that, I mean, we just got to take a look at what's going on in the media, not only in the UK, but in the US, to a lesser extent in Europe at the moment, because obviously they are still much more focused on what's occurring with the financial collapse, as it sort of moves north from Italy into France. But here in the UK, while I've been away, I've been monitoring the British media, and frankly, I have been shocked at the lack of reaction to the media mindscaping, which is effectively preparing the public for the impending attack on Iran. Now, this is, in my opinion, I mean, this is sort of drunk on power after what's occurred in Libya, which in my opinion is a horrendous war crime, and basically as a nation we should, in my opinion, take no pride in what has occurred there.
And indeed, this is something we actually touched on, and on very early on the Edge this year, you were noting what was likely to happen in Libya, and the truth will out, as it were.
Well, indeed. In fact, was it late March or early April, we did a show on Libya, and I take no great delight in acknowledging that everything that we predicted in that discussion has come to pass. And this is not claiming any special insight. It's simply reading the scripts and then presenting the information to the public as to what is going to occur. And of course, we are still dismissed as outrageous conspiracy theorists. And in fact, didn't I see a comment in the Independent from Saturday where it actually said that one of the conspiracy theories about Libya was that Gaddafi had been deposed because of his plan to introduce the gold dinar and sell oil in gold dinar, which of course is absolutely correct, but is now being labelled as a conspiracy theory.
Despite all the evidence to it. It's quite crazy, and I'm intrigued that you were saying about the way the public is being framed, if you like, in terms of what is being said about Iran. This morning I went onto Google News, put the term Iran in, and saw what came out top. And this is just a flavour of the couple of stories that were there, right at the top of the meter, if you like, in terms of when you Google Iran. And consequently, this is a measure of how this is being portrayed in the mainstream. The first story was from AFP, and they said Iran to dominate UN nuclear energy meet. The two-day International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, gathering was expected to result in a resolution criticising Tehran, but it was unclear how hard-hitting this would be. Last week, the agency came the closest yet to accusing Iran outright of seeking to develop nuclear weapons, in a report immediately rejected by the Islamic Republic as baseless. So that's the one stream of how they're being framed, if you like. And then a headline in the Washington Post: Saudi Arabia is pressing for a UN resolution that would deplore the alleged Iranian plot to kill the Saudi ambassador to the United States. So we have this picture of Iran as a state, desperate for nuclear weapons, taking out people they have a problem with by attempted assassinations. They're the bad guys. Let's do the John Wayne bit, go in there and sort them out.
It's classic, isn't it? I mean, Iran is being set up to be the fall guy for a false flag event. And fortunately, more and more people are starting to realise that most of these events that are presented in one way by the mainstream media normally have other angles to them. And so more and more people are actually starting to not take everything that they read at face value. In fact, in the article that I referenced a few minutes ago that was in the Independent, and although it was a hit piece on anybody who has an alternative view of what's occurring, it did actually acknowledge that 84% of people in the United States of America in a recent poll question the official version of 9/11. Now, 84% is not insignificant.
It was intriguing noticing in the comment section underneath that article, someone said, no, that figure's not right.
Well, isn't that, you know, to be expected?
Yeah.
You know, what we've got is a situation where, one way or another, the neo-colonialists are gagging to take Iran's resources, to take control of Iran's resources. Now, there's other agendas as well, because we know that Netanyahu has a slightly different agenda, and maybe we'll come back to the Israeli leadership agenda shortly. But you know, Iran is not rising to the bait. I mean, Iran is a very astute nation. Ahmadinejad is a very astute leader. And of course, in the West, what is not appreciated is the absolute skill with which Ahmadinejad leads that country, because effectively it's a theocracy.
Right.
It's a theocracy with a secular leadership. And Ahmadinejad, you know, has to play, you know, walk a very thin tightrope.
Yeah.
But, you know, he's playing that role very, very well right now. Of course, he does, understandably, wind up the West. Particularly, you know, when he has the opportunity to speak at the UN. And of course, we have the theatre of the US and EU representatives at the UN walking out during his speeches when they claim that he said one thing, when in reality, when you look at the actual transcripts of what he said, he rarely says what they claim that he has reportedly said. But it's all theatre. It's pure theatre to demonise Ahmadinejad and Iran in the eyes of the British and the European public. And this mindscaping process is so important, because they don't want to encourage a situation like occurred in 2003, when literally millions of people from all across the world hit the streets in protest at the imminence of the attack on Iraq, which of course occurred on March 20th, 2003. So they actually want a situation like occurred in Libya, where when they started the outrageous bombing attacks, I mean, I gather it was 26,000 sorties. I mean, this is a hell of a lot of ordnance that was dropped on Libya, but there was barely a murmur from the public around the world. Now, obviously, people had their other issues to address, because we're right in the middle of a massive financial collapse. But nonetheless, the Arab Spring had created the opportunity for the mindscaping, so that when, as we discussed in March, so that when Libya was invaded or attacked, then it was just another domino in the whole Arab Spring, and people didn't react. So now, after the success, and I use that term, of course, in the ironic sense, but the success in Libya, now they're moving towards Iran, and they want the same thing. They basically want to be able to attack Iran without any real protest or uprising from the US or the British European public.
Actually getting people on the streets to protest then.
That's what they want to avoid. Now, what we had recently was we had a situation where there was an explosion at I believe it was a munitions repository. And I believe 17 people were killed.
And this is in
Iran. This is in Iran. Now, what's very, very interesting is both Israel and the US claimed that this was an Israeli or US Special Forces attack. And what they were trying to do was bait Iran into launching some kind of reprisal event. But Iran has responded and said, this was no attack. This was simply an accident, and unfortunately 17 people got killed. Now, what is the truth of the matter? I have no idea. It could well have been Mossad, US Special Forces launching an attack to try and bait Iran into responding. It could well have been. I wouldn't fall off my chair in shock if that was the case. But the Iranians, either way, if it was an accident, they've stated it was an accident. But if it was something other, what they're saying is, you know what, we're not going to allow this to escalate into something that is just going to get out of control.
Right.
So they're not responding to the bait that's being offered by the Israelis and the US Special Forces, or US, to launch a reprisal attack. And now, of course, what's happening, because they haven't responded, so now we're seeing this media suggestion that there's an Iranian plot to assassinate the Saudi
Arabian
ambassador.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just outrageous. I mean, the likelihood of this is pretty much slim to none. I mean, this is not the kind of incident that Iran would launch. I mean, if Iran's going to do something, it's going to do something mega. The reality is, I don't think it's going to do anything at all. Iran knows the situation that it's in. It knows it's walking the tightrope. It'll push the envelope as far as it can. But it's not going to deliberately go out of its way to initiate a plot that would attract, heavy retaliation.
And I mentioned Syria in the opening there, and certainly Syria seems to be dominating the news that we are actually hearing and seeing in the mainstream. And I note that the Arab League has given Syria 3 days to stop the bloody repression of protesters and allow in teams of observers. So the Arab League, this is not some 80s synth pop band, is it? Who are these observers?
Well, that's a very good question. And what we also need to monitor very closely is what goes on behind closed doors. Because we know that the US in particular is more than adept at negotiating arrangements with the Arab League. So what happens is the US sort of propose to the Arab League that they come out and make a public statement against Syria, and in return they offer something else. And that of course is what we don't know at the moment. I mean, there's no question that Assad obviously has been under a lot of pressure. And there's a desperation to remove Assad because he doesn't play ball with the corporate globalists. And I believe that Syria is also still outside of the Rothschild-controlled banking system, which would also be a very good reason for them to be putting pressure on it.
And a common facet of every country in the axis of evil.
It's the common denominator, exactly the case. Now, I'm not painting Assad as a model leader. But now there's something that people actually need to comprehend about the Middle East. And that is that it is a tribal culture. And it is incredibly arrogant of the West or any other part of the world to foist upon another part of the planet a different culture in terms of the way in which they are governed. Now, and of course, it's done on the basis of freedom and democracy, when in reality, of course, the opposite is really true. But the tribal system works on the basis that the strongest leader rules, and the strongest leader is given respect. Now, if there is an opportunity for a rival leader to take power, then they will do so. And of course, that is exactly what occurred in Libya. And in this case, of course, the rival tribal leaders were offered the outrageous support of the global corporatist mercenary army, which is known as NATO. And so the rival leader had this massive support to oust Gaddafi from power, and of course it was taken. But now it's a rival tribal leader. And I think that the Libyan people are going to find that maybe it is going to turn out to be a case of better the devil you knew.
Indeed. And of course we get on to the fact that this is probably Al-Qaeda by any other name.